about you, but to me the Lydian sound is usually something that I hear beginners say that they're using, and mostly that's because they want to have an excuse to just run up and down the scale without having to think about what notes they're hitting. But actually the Lydian sound is something that you can incorporate into your vocabulary, and it's a really great thing to just use in a conscious way. And in this video I'm going to show you 5 different ways to make some great Lydian sounding lines that you can add to your vocabulary. My name is Jens Larsen. If you want to learn jazz and make music, then subscribe to my channel and click the little bell notification icon so you don't miss anything. So I'm kind of assuming that you already have an idea about what Lydian is when you're checking out this video, but at the same time I'm using it a little bit different because I think the best way to use it is to use it as an alternative sound for the tonic sound on a major chord. So that means that if you're in the key of C major, then you can of course play a C major scale on that, and that's also what we expect to hear. But if you have a cadence to that C major, and then instead of playing the C major with a C major scale, you use the sound of a G major scale, which is the place where you have a C major on the 4th degree, then you get a different sound and you get an extra note that you don't really expect, and that's something that you can use as a different type of sound, as a way to create some variation in your solos, and that's kind of how you want to use it. Using Lydian as the sound over a 4 chord in a major key is actually not that effective, because if you want to emphasize the 4 chord, then you don't want to emphasize the sharp 11. You want to emphasize just the basic chord tones, and then not really the Lydian sound. So that's important to think about as well. Not only how you play it and where, but also how often, because you can use it as a surprise, but don't use it as just sort of a vanilla color that you always throw in there. This first example is pretty common, but at the same time it's extremely useful and it's very easy to play, so you kind of have to have it in there. And that is to play a pentatonic scale for the C major 7 sharp 11 sound. And the pentatonic scale I'm using here is the B minor pentatonic. So that's a really easy scale to just work with, and when you're using that, you really get sort of the basic part of the chord. So you have the 3rd and the 7th, and you also have the sharp 11, and you have a 9 and a 13, so you have just a lot of good extensions and sounds you can use on top of the major 7 sound and really get that Lydian sound out there. That's also what I'm doing here. I'm coming out on the Lydian sound just to really emphasize that, and then playing this chord arpeggio, which is also found in the pentatonic scale, and then just down the scale, ending on the 13. The difficult thing about using the Lydian sound is that we kind of define it by just one note, and that's that sharp 11 on the major 7 chord. That's of course fine, but at the same time it's difficult to make any melodies with just one note. So you kind of want to have a way to get to that note, and you also want to have some different ideas and structures that you can use that contain that note and also still sound like the chord. Because if you just look at the diatonic chords, then they either contain the sharp 11 or they contain the sound of the chord that you're playing on. Another very practical way to create some great sounding Lydian melodies is to use a triad pair, and that's what I'm doing here. So I'm using the most sort of basic and most common triad pair that we have, and in this case that's 2 major triads next to each other. And for my C major 7 sharp 11 here, that means I'm using a C major triad and a D major triad. And we kind of have just sort of the very basic colors in the C major triad, and then all the interesting extensions and the sharp 11 in the D major triad. So I'm coming out on the sharp 11 again because I want to really emphasize that sound, and if you put it on the 1, then it's quite clearly another sound than just the major scale that you would expect in a cadence like this. But I'm also trying to create a line that is in itself kind of amplifying that by using a large range and making the line a little bit dramatic. And I'm doing that by first playing first inversion D major triad, then a root position C major, and then another first inversion D major. And this line has a range that's quite large because I'm starting down here and I'm coming out up here on this high D, and that really helps with just creating sort of more of a surprising effect when you're using this. And I think that's really important. You don't want to play all your 2/5s with a Lydian sound on the tonic chord. You only want to use it once in a while, but then make sure that you also really make it count, and then really get that sharp 11 in there, and also maybe create some other more surprising sounds in terms of the melodies that you're using. This arpeggio is one of my favorite arpeggios to use. It's a really nice color, very strong color to use. And I'm going to kind of ironically call it a C major 7 flat 5, even though in the context, of course, it's about using the sharp 11. And sometimes people get really upset when I say that it's a flat 5. But the fact is that I'm playing an arpeggio with 4 notes, and calling it a sharp 11 would imply that there are more notes than 4. So that's why I'm not calling it that. And if you really get upset about it, you can complain in the comments. If you're keeping it kind of decent, then I won't block you. So the first part of the line is really just coming out on the E and then using that arpeggio, so ending on the 7th here, and then I skip down and make sort of an ascending run, which is really just playing the arpeggio in a little bit more than 1 octave, and then skipping up on the sharp 11 or flat 5, and then ending the line there to really get the Lydian sound out there. This example is really using that we can also resolve in an interesting way melodically when we go from the dominant back to the tonic chord. And I think it's also useful to take those kind of things into consideration, because we're not only thinking about like, okay, I'm playing on a C major 7 and that's this and nothing exists around it. You want to play solos, and you also want to keep in mind that sometimes you can make certain kinds of melodies because you're using this sound on this chord and this sound on the next chord. And that's what I'm doing here, because I'm playing a G7 altered, and the arpeggio that I'm using for that one is an F half diminished arpeggio, which is giving me sort of a G7 flat 9 flat 13, and then I'm resolving that by moving it up a half step and then playing an F sharp half diminished arpeggio. And for my C Lydian sound, that's giving me the sharp 11 and then the 13 and the root and the 3rd. So I kind of have the chord covered, and then the 6 of the root, and then the sharp 11 in there. And that works really well to just have this sort of shifting. And that's a musical idea that is really strong to have as well. If you want to first prepare, you're kind of thinking about that you want to go to the Lydian sound already when you're playing the dominant, and then you're just using the fact that you can just move the whole thing up a half step. The way I'm doing it is that I'm playing up one arpeggio and then down the other one. But you could also just really just shift it parallel, and that will work as well. The reason that I can keep on making videos every week is that there is a community of people over on Patreon that are supporting the channel. I'm very grateful for their support, and it's because of them that I can keep on making all these videos. So if you want to help me keep making videos, then check out my Patreon page, and if you join us over on Patreon, I can also give you something in return for your support. This example is also using the idea of moving a structure around in a parallel way, and here I'm combining it with some odd note groupings, because that's a nice way to create something that's a little bit less predictable. The problem you have with moving one kind of idea around is that it gets predictable and boring. But if you have something that is sort of very recognizable and moving around in terms of the notes, and then a little bit more surprising in terms of rhythm, then that combination works really well quite often. And actually, then it's a little bit like the predictability of the melody kind of supports the surprising sound of the rhythm. And that's what I'm using here. So I'm playing some sus4 triads, and the sus4 triad I'm using on the major 7 chord, because that's of course the important part. That's a B sus4. So that's giving me just the 3rd and 7th, and then the sharp 11 of the C major 7. But then I'm also using sus4 triads on the other chords, and I'm using a C sus4 on the D minor, so that's a D minor 11, and I'm using sort of a B flat sus4 on the G7, and that's giving me a sharp 9, flat 7 and a flat 13, and then resolving that. So I kind of have almost like an encircling of the final sus4 triad here. And then I'm playing that in groups of 5, so I'm playing this melody. And that way I have this melody that's shifting on top, but it still makes sense, and you can still hear that it's the same thinking that's happening throughout the entire cadence. If you want to check out some more suggestions and have some more ideas for what you can use when you're improvising over a major 7 chord, then check out this short playlist where I have a few videos on that topic. They're kind of ranging from ideas from bebop all the way up to stuff that's somewhere in the future with some symmetric scales and altered major 7 chords with sharp 9s and sharp 5. Thank you for watching. Until next time.